Yes. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. After a short break, I'm very excited to welcome you back at almost our last session with the Art of Recruitment, our webinar series. And today I'm very honored and humbled that Roopesh Panchasra joins us. Currently, Roopesh is the global head of executive talent acquisition at Uber. But since 4 days, he's also the co-lead of all of talent acquisition at Uber. Roopesh will introduce himself properly and share a little bit more about his background. But before we get into that, I would also take the opportunity to update everyone about the situation in Ukraine, and especially with our colleagues that are based in Ukraine. That was also the reason why we took a short break. And 2 weeks ago, for the people that were able to attend, we actually had a live webinar session with the people currently being in Ukraine about their situation. Out of the 12 employees that we have that are from Ukraine, 8 are still in Ukraine, of which the majority is actually back to work. Talking about resilience, but as you can imagine, they are still faced with the Russian aggression and terror that's happening in their country. Any support or any outreach is still very much appreciated, and we truly hope that this nightmare will be over soon. But thank you as well for so many people that reach out to us and show their support. Without further ado, Roopesh, welcome. I'm super happy to have you here, and especially given that since 4 days you've been also now co-lead of all of TA for Uber, making it extra special for you to be on our webinar series. Before I give the floor to you guys, this will be an interactive session with me and Roopesh having basically, I'm trying to get as much out of Roopesh as possible through a Q&A session. And type any questions that you have in the chat. I will immediately inject them into the conversation. Both me and Roopesh can see it, so we can really get this conversation going. But before I start firing away, Roopesh, happy to have you, and
it's great to be here.
Yeah.
Great to be here. Yeah, thanks for the invite. I think you and I had some interactions, and I like what you're doing, and it's good to share ideas and hear stories from like-minded people. So yeah, great to be part of it.
Awesome.
So shall I do a quick intro and share my screen? Okay, let's do that.
Perfect.
All right. Hopefully you can see my screen coming up.
Yes, we can see it.
You can see that?
Yeah, perfect.
All right. So let me tell you a little bit about me. Hopefully you can see that. So I live in London, and that's a nice little image of the sights of London. I've had the opportunity to work at lots of incredible companies. Most of them have been US based, but I've sort of stood true to my roots in London. And even though I've been able to travel and stay in a few different places, which I'll go through very shortly, it's home for me. And I've got a huge network of family and friends here. And if I relocated, I'd have to sort of move 20 or 30 people. That's never going to happen. I love what I do. And I'm one of those annoying people in my friend circle and my family circle to say, I'm privileged to be in a role that I genuinely enjoy. And if that ever is never the case, if that's ever not the case, I'll probably decide to do something else. But genuinely, I mean, there's good days and bad days, especially in the market that we're in today. But just being in recruiting, working in selection, helping businesses really identify what's best for them as opposed to what's best is something I just still get a kick out of. I'm at Uber for a year. It's still relatively new, and yeah, it's just nice to help an organization grow at the pace that we are and the others have. I'm really a family man. I was blessed very late in life with twin girls, which I'll share later on, about 7 years ago. It used to all be about work for me, and I take my work incredibly seriously, but it's now no longer all about work, and it's family first. So I haven't figured out that balance yet. I'm very good at telling my teams how to find balance, but finding that balance and being present with my family is something that I'm still working on, but extremely precious to me. my kids are 7, so up until 7 years ago, I used to play a lot of golf. It's now relatively infrequently, but if there's a passion I have, it's to get out on a golf course. Normally when I'm a fair weather golfer, normally just in the summer. So look, this is a bit of a timeline of some of the things that I've been doing. I started in executive search. I spent 10 years in contingency, then moved into specializing in exec, learned some great things from great people. A lot of my mentors during those days were ex-big search firms, the SHRM search firms. So I learned from some of the best people in the industry, and that's really helped me throughout my career. A few people in those early years gave me a chance before they should have and saw something in me, and I'm extremely grateful to them, and I still keep in touch. One of our clients was VMware, and VMware was a pre-IPO organization. It was a bit of a David and Goliath. They were going up against the likes of Microsoft and Citrix and winning business they should never be winning. And we worked on a number of searches for them. We got a search for a head of TA to run international. They didn't have a presence outside of the US. Long story short, I took a bit of a leap of faith, went in-house, and went through the IPO with them. Was incredibly fortunate and just had a great time there. I then moved to Expedia, largest online travel agent in the world, and got an opportunity to not only work but to live in various different locations. So spent some time in Seattle. I lived in India when they were setting up the India office for 6-month stints, but it was incredible to get that opportunity. I then went to an incredible organization called Workday, and the consistent theme between VMware, Expedia, and Workday was when I joined, they had little or no presence outside of the US. And so how do they build muscle and build capability, credible capability, trusted capability outside of their US headquarters? And that takes time, right? Not only to build teams, but to be branded as a team that really can service the needs of the business outside of the US. And that's been the theme, the international build across these 3 organizations. I've put some life moments at the bottom, places that I live, but also a life moment there was when I had twins that sort of changed things for me 7 years ago. And I just wanted to put them on there. So, and then I moved to SAP, very different organization, 110,000 people globally. It wasn't a new company, but it was to go there and set something new up in a company that's not new. So they didn't really have an established exec recruiting function or a branding team. And we went in to set that up. A very different proposition to what I'd been used to, but just an incredible time. I spent just over 5 years there, got a chance to live in Frankfurt for a while as well, and just humbled by all of the people that I met. I'm now at Uber. I celebrated a year a few weeks ago. And I joined to help really build our exec recruiting function, which I'll talk about in more depth during this call. But as of Monday, my boss, that's been my boss for the last year, that was at Uber for the last 3 years, very amicably left Uber to join another organization. And I've now been asked, and very humbled to be asked, alongside my colleague, as an interim to co-lead the global TA function, which is going to be an incredible opportunity. So that's me.
Awesome. Talking about different experiences, different locations, and a very rich and amazing career already. And now maybe your biggest challenge yet at Uber.
Possibly. Yeah, possibly.
So the topic of today is leadership succession, right? But there's so many elements there that we can touch upon. Kind of like the first thing, what I think is interesting to understand is, why are in-house executive teams established in the first place? And what is the moment when you should start to think about that?
That's a good question. I think, look, if you look at sort of the trend in terms of the investment organizations have made to build out their internal talent acquisition capability, not exec for now, it's happened probably over the last couple of decades, where it started with small teams. It started with relatively junior people. It started with people that maybe didn't make it on the search or agency side that decided to move in. It started with not huge budgets, so you couldn't hire very senior people. But that's evolved, as we all know, over the last probably couple of decades. I think the exec recruiting team just didn't move as fast, because most organizations, the way the sort of genesis of exec recruiting didn't happen until later on, where you build internal teams to focus and cater for the masses, whether it's your university hiring, whether it's your hiring all the way up to exec. But then when it comes to exec, and still to this day, the perception of many organizations is, well, these are our most important hires. These are our most critical hires. Let's go and give it to the people that know what they're doing at Korn Ferry, Spencer, Heidrick, Russell Reynolds, whoever it may be, because surely that's a real art, and you need to have the Rolodex, and you need to have been in the industry for years and years and years to know all of the people. And for that reason, I think it was just very, very late that organizations really looked at their internal teams and felt that we could service the leadership population of the organization just as well as we've serviced the volume hiring. And I think it must have started with, we're spending huge fees. Surely we should be able to save something, right? Or we're moving people internally. We need a process around that at leadership level. So I think it probably started with a cost thing. And for many organizations, it still is, to be honest. We have these teams just for cost purposes, and there's no other measures to it. When I first started at VMware, I had one KPI to reduce agency fees. And so if I was able to show that quarter on quarter, the fees had dropped and my hiring increased, I'd get my bonus. And gone are those days. So it's evolved since then, but that's probably the genesis of how it all started.
So interesting there, right? Because you've worked on the agency side, VMware, Expedia, SAP, and now Uber, different type of companies, different type of settings, different countries in that sense. How were in those companies the exec search functions or your work to that extent different? But also, like, how were they the same?
In terms of the internal setup of those teams.
Exactly. So your way of working, right? And especially, I think also for our audience today, explain a little bit in terms of what does it mean to be an executive search consultant inside of a business like Expedia, like Uber.
Yeah. Okay. So I'd say I'll give you an idea of some of the differences of how I've seen certain teams set up. And to be honest, at many organizations today, and I keep a finger on the pulse with organizations that have set up their internal exec recruiting functions. The vast majority are set up the same way. And that is, you want someone to be able to deliver the same quality and speed of service and the same insights as those big SHRM search firms that I've mentioned. But they don't set up the teams to emulate what those search firms look like today. So it's all well and good hiring people that have the gravitas, understand the level of engagement, can stand up on a whiteboard and craft a strategy. But then you don't give them the tools, you don't give them the resources, you don't give them research capability, it's a centralized talent coordination team. They're doing their own scheduling. And what tends to happen is you're diluting the impact that individual is able to have. If you're hiring someone that has a Rolodex, that has their finger on the pulse of the top executives within their domain, understands the competitive landscape, but then you put handcuffs on them and get them to do so much outside of pure search, that's where it can be restrained. And that's where there's always a battle with senior individuals being hired, going into seeing their business leaders to say, I can do for you everything that you thought couldn't happen internally. But then there's a bit of a angst between, well, it's not actually happening. You're not doing it at the same speed. I'm not getting the slate of people. You can't anticipate demand. So most organizations are set up that way. What I've tried to influence over the years is to really try and build internal models the same way as you see a search firm model. So let me give you an example. At Uber, I have something called a pod model. And it emulates how some of the search firms work. So every search consultant that we have here has a partner that does all of their research and has a partner that's dedicated to them to do their coordination work. So they work in pods of 3. So at any strategy meeting, 3 of them join. If there's calibration exercise meetings or there's work to be done around job descriptions, all three of them would work on that together. And that team are the ones that are sort of perceived as the unit to navigate around the organization and deliver upon the search. So we've set it up in a way so we can get the best out of the people that we're hiring at the recruiter level, and giving them the support that they need to succeed. It also presents a nice succession plan.
So interesting, right? And also for the people maybe less familiar with how executive search firms are set up typically, can you very briefly explain the coordinator, the researcher role, and the consultant in terms of different responsibilities and why that's typical with search firms, right?
I should have done that. So, and I'm generalizing here, but if you call upon a search firm, and they have a place in this market, so I don't want this to come across like we're taking away everything a search firm ever did. There is a space for them. I think it's over the years, it's going to become more concentrated. They're all diversifying into other areas, whether it's assessments or whether it's, whatever it may be. Like the search work is not their core work anymore. You'll see fewer firms out there and highly specialist areas. But yeah, so when you call upon a search firm, normally the person that calls you or comes to see you in the brand new Hugo Boss suit and the beautiful hairstyle is not the person that's going to be doing the market mapping, is not the person that understands the competitive landscape, is not the person that's going to be doing that initial outreach, is definitely not the person that's going to be doing that initial call to prospects to determine whether they're interested in selling the initial proposition. That individual would normally go back to their office and speak to their research team or speak to their sources and get them to do some of that journalistic work to understand who's out there, what companies we should be targeting, and coming up with a list that consultant will then potentially use in their discussions with the client. Again, at most organizations, because they haven't set it up with that level of capability, and I know it's a luxury of resources, it's that person that's having to do all of that work themselves. And then the coordinator, for me, and this is the difference between maybe the exec search side and some of the volume hiring side. On some of the industry volume hiring side, I think you can have a centralized coordination team. They don't have to be scattered across the globe. They can be in one or two locations. It's a central repository email, and they will deal with the scheduling as the requests come through. For us, it has to be a white glove service. It has to be, Adrian, if you are the executive, you need to have one point of contact. You need to have the same person that briefs you. You need to have the same person that sends you details of the interviews and the interviewers and the prep packs. That's the kind of level of high touch service that we want to introduce into any process. And it shouldn't be going into a general pool where it could be anyone that replies.
Yeah. Okay, great. So,
makes sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So kind of like a little bit on the nuances per the different companies that you work with, right? Because at Uber you say, hey, you do have the resources, but I think you just gave the example at VMware was a little different. So a lot of stuff is the same. So what are the differences, what you've seen throughout your career in terms of setup and your way of working?
I think what's really important is unlike maybe the industry or volume hiring teams where you can see the return on your investment pretty quickly. Again, I'm generalizing here because there is a lot of outreach and passive and headhunting work that goes on in that teams. But generally speaking, those teams will hold more requisitions. Generally speaking, they would advertise a lot more of their requisitions. And therefore, there's a lot more applicants to go through. So if you think about what that world could look like between someone having 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, maybe more requisitions, and if you have 20, 30, 50 applications for each, that's a lot of intelligence that you have to filter through to get to where you need to be. On the exec side, it has to be, it's not a volume game. And you would assume the kind of people that you need are not going to be on your careers page. They're not going to respond to an advert on Indeed or whatever it may be. And if they do, they're possibly not going to be the right people for you. So if your people, let's assume, are at great companies with great jobs, with great job titles, with great salaries, and with RSU handcuffs on, that even if they wanted to leave, they couldn't financially. It wouldn't work for them. How do you prize them out and create intrigue and interest and get them enticed enough to be open to having a conversation?
Yeah.
That's the kind of skill set that's needed in an environment. And to do that can take 2 calls, 3 calls. It can take 6 months, a year. We've hired people this year that we engaged with years ago. And knowing that's the case, your return on investment is not immediate.
Yeah.
And someone higher up the food chain in any organization needs to understand that. They need to be your sponsor, and they need to help you build out a team that is ready for tomorrow, as opposed to filling every job that you have today. And there lies the challenge.
Yeah. And where do you feel that's the tipping point of when it makes sense to build an in-house executive search team?
Look, I think there's if you have volatility in your space, if you work in an industry where, certainly in the market that we're in today, there is a revolving door. Yeah. Tech is in a space right now where I simply haven't seen it before. We have people that have left Uber that don't want to leave Uber, that believe in Uber and joined because they feel this is very early days and the opportunity to double, triple, quadruple the share price is absolutely real. But they're being approached by our competitors with salaries that are astronomical. Mm-hmm. And if you're in an environment that's that volatile, then you cannot just rely on a firm to be able to help you fill the seats that are made vacant today. You need to anticipate demand. You need to have, like with most search firms would do, you need to build that database of people that you can call upon and you already have a relationship with, that are part of your Rolodex. If it's just in time recruiting, it's very difficult to be able to manage an exec team. And you could only really do that, in my opinion, meaningfully, if you have a team that advocates for your organization, that has a vested interest in Uber and is part of the fabric of the company. Yeah. I think there's, if you do it right, you can make an incredible splash in an organization. But again, it doesn't happen immediately. So you need to make sure you give it the time it needs.
So do you feel like, as a business, right, you should at your first job, right, cut down agency spend? If that certain points begins to go on like continuous basis, is that the moment when companies should think about really dedicated executive search function? Is that kind of like the moment where you see that coming in?
It can't just be about money. It's going to be a factor, right? Yeah. And we still talk, when we talk about our KPIs, we still talk about cost avoidance. Yeah. I don't like doing it, but we do say, of the 150 positions that we hired this year, 120 of them were passive, outbound, external individuals that we brought into the organization. The cost avoidance figure, which is what a lot of companies use, is if we had gone externally for this role, your average fee would have been X amount. And if you multiply that, you're saving millions and millions for an organization. Yeah. So it has to, unfortunately, it's just like any TA team. Yeah. You don't want to be judged just on your hires. There's so much more to it than that, but it has to be a factor. But alongside that, you then bake into, and this happens over a period of time, other people that you're hiring staying longer, other people that you're hiring being open to be given new opportunities in different parts of the organization. Are the people that you're hiring have a better leadership trust score and have a better followership within your organization? So it's not just about the hiring, it's who you're hiring and the quality measures that you're putting into place to say, we're going out to market and not just filling a job to get a fee. We're going out to market because I'm a shareholder in Uber and I have a vested interest to make sure every hire that we make that's responsible for making those decisions is going to impact my share price. And so having an in-house team that really feels they are, it's up to them to help the company succeed. That's the kind of balance you need to create.
Yeah. A question in chat, but also a question in the question section, Roopesh. One question: what was the biggest challenge building the global executive search team at Uber?
The biggest, it's not necessarily at Uber. So I generally, some of the challenges is, what are we here to do? And what do we want to be known for in an organization? And depending on who you ask, you could get a different response. Because if you're asking maybe our leaders and maybe our HR leaders, it's almost to operate like a firm would. It's to make sure that you fill a job quickly every time there's a vacancy, right? So every time we have a need to hire a leader, we need to be able to rely upon your team and have the confidence in your team that you can deliver upon the mandate that we share with you. My vision of what an internal recruiting function should look like is very different. And this is where it takes time, and you need to build trust and credibility. And I can go through some of the strategy. For me, it's a three-pronged approach.
Yeah.
It's transacting on an open search is what people think we're here to do. But what about that top of funnel? What about engaging with external executives? What about understand the competitive landscape? What about breaking down the org charts of organizations that you regularly hire from outside of a requisition? What about doing events at top of funnel? What about introducing incredible leaders to our incredible leaders outside of a requisition? Mm-hmm. And this is where this is not going to lead to a hire immediately, but this is where activity at top of funnel is critically important. So if you're part of an organization that has a question mark against their brand, maybe there's people out there that work for incredible companies people haven't heard of. Maybe there's people out there that work at incredible companies where there's misconceptions. Like Uber, many people that we speak to, there's misconceptions about who we are. They think we're a cab firm that deliver pizza, right?
Yeah.
We are a cab firm and we do deliver pizza, but there's so much more to the organization than that.
Yeah.
They also think, and those that know about the history of Uber, and there's a documentary on it at the moment. Travis Kalanick, who's our founder, was just an incredible individual, an absolute genius, but didn't always do things the right way. Yeah. And it was all about market share and growing as quickly as you can, and sometimes at any cost.
Yeah.
And so if that's the perception people have of your organization, it's almost too late at the time of a requisition to call upon someone to say, let me tell you a bit about Uber, because what I found when I joined is we're spending far too much time speaking to individuals and convincing them we are not the Uber they think we once were.
Yeah. Yeah.
As opposed to talking to them about their careers and their journeys and their aspirations and why Uber could be a great home for them. We need to tackle that outside of a requisition. And there's also that top of funnel piece where everyone on this call, I'm sure, has conversations about underrepresented communities. Everyone had this conversations about women in leadership. And of course, we all want to do everything we can, but there's almost a complacency in recruiting that miraculously the most underrepresented leaders or incredible women leaders are going to miraculously appear at the time that you have a requisition. The world doesn't work that way. So again, going back to what I said, what do we want to be known for, and why are we here? A lot of it is about top of funnel and creating a community, creating environments, building out that Rolodex, making introductions way before a requisition. That's not traditionally why these teams were set up. There's also the next piece around, once we've hired an individual, do we then wash our hands of the situation, and whatever happens to that individual once they are here is down to somebody else, is down to HR? And I don't believe that. I don't want to own talent management for leaders. That's not my expertise, and it's certainly not my job. But I absolutely need my teams to be at the table when they're discussing succession, when they're discussing the skills that we need for tomorrow in certain organizations, when they want recommendations for internal talent that could be right for that part of the organization. But if your company is of any kind of scale, quite often you don't know what's happening in different parts of the business.
Yeah.
Whereas my team have a relationship with most executives around the company, where we're able to go into conversations and make recommendations of internal talent as well as external talent during those talent review meetings. And quite often that happens sort of in isolation. And I do feel, as an exec recruiting function, again, the three areas: really focusing on top of funnel, transacting on a search, but also be part of that talent review, talent management discussion, and having an influence there. That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So interesting, right? So can you give an example of like some of the top of the funnel activities that you do?
I can give you a real example. Yesterday evening at the Chase Center in San Francisco, we had 16 carefully picked senior product leaders from various organizations, very credible organizations. We invited them to meet some of our most prominent leaders. We had some thought leaders around diversity and inclusion, generally talking to the group around the challenges that we face and the bias and what companies are doing to overcome that and how we can learn from each other. We all watched an NBA game together, so we created a bit of fun. And we're creating communities. Now, these communities aren't necessarily people that we will want to hire tomorrow. Many wouldn't want to come to Uber, but like-minded people that are facing the same challenges that we can network with, and create this sort of passion around certain topics. If we do that with frequency across a number of different countries and a number of different lines of business, all of a sudden we're creating a really powerful group of people that can be very influential, whether for jobs at Uber, whether it's for references, or whether for customers. I mean, most of the people that we speak to are customers of Uber. So it's really important for us to make sure that we maintain that. Top of funnel activities around whether we're going to identify certain new products in the space. If we're introducing new products into the market, well, why not have thought leaders from various different organizations providing their opinion on certain ideas that we have to go to market? I mean, without giving too much away, we don't want to bring people together to say, here's a job description, who wants to apply? That doesn't work at the levels that we operate at. It's all about building relationships, creating intrigue, and being aligned on perspectives. And that then, is infectious.
Let's switch gears a little bit, because what I'm particularly curious on is your role within overall Uber leadership, right? The leaders of today might not be the leaders that you need for tomorrow, but it's still kind of like the leaders that you work with, either your boss or direct peers or whatsoever, that you might need to replace. Like, how does that work? And how does that kind of, system get into place? How do you deal with it? And as well, how do you translate the vision of tomorrow into the people that you need to hire today?
That's a tough one, right? Okay, so let's tackle it like this. When most leaders in most organizations are hired to not only manage the team, but to script the blueprint for that part of the business. So if you're hiring a chief marketing officer into your organization, very few CMOs are going to just say, fantastic, it looks great, I will assume the role and keep everything as is. Most leaders will be expected to come in, make an assessment of their organization, see how productive and effective the teams are, make an assessment of the individuals in that team, and then go by what the business goals are. Where does the business want to go, and where does my marketing function fit into that? So they build out normally a 2, 3, 4, 5-year strategic plan. That's what most leaders would need to come in and do. What do you see? Where do we want to go? Let's build out a plan, and everything that we do now is aimed towards this plan. So normally on the first page of any slide would be, remember, here's our pillars. This is what we need to achieve, right? In very few organizations, does that conversation then translate into, okay, we know where you want to take marketing in 3 years. We know you want to expand in Asia. We know we want to penetrate markets in France and whatever it may be, right? But how does that translate to your people strategy? Do you have the skills in your organization to do that today? Do we actually need those skills in your organization today? Because if this is a 3-year strat plan, it may be that you're not going to expand into India for another 2 years.
Yeah.
And if we don't have the skills in the organization today, how do we even know what skills we need? How are we going to identify them? And then how are we going to plug that gap? And these are the conversations that we're trying to introduce at Uber. And we're making real good headway where no one's ever asked them the question. Like, our HR leaders are incredible here, and they help with organizational design. They help with all of the OD work, and they sort of have conversations around succession, but it's not forward thinking enough to include us into that conversation to say, here's my strat plan. Here's where we're going. Here's what's successful. Here's where the gaps are. In 2 years, remember, we need to go to Asia. Well, that should tie into our top of funnel activities. You know, if we have a perspective and a lens on where they want to go, our conversations with those leaders are not about what positions do you want to fill? We've done the long list. Here's the org design for these competitors, and here's your calibration shortlist. Yeah. It's around, who do you want to meet next time you're in Chicago? Or here's a map of the best product leaders at the 3 companies that you said you admire in India. We're going to develop relationships with them, and we're going to see whether we can do something together. Like, that cyclical process from strategic plan to people strategy to top of funnel is really difficult to be included in. But if you can crack that and then show the impact of your work at top of funnel, your transacting on open searches becomes a lot easier for a few reasons. Number one, you've built that level of trust and credibility. All of a sudden, this is a team that not only understands my open positions that can fill them, is actually helping me think about my strategic plan. Because we've said to them, in Asia, the talent that you need doesn't even exist. And you might want to think about Australia as opposed to Singapore if you're going to think about building out this business. I mean, these are incredible, meaningful advisor level discussions that they would never have thought to come to us for. And so again, it's only been a year at Uber, but we're making headway where we're taking one leader at a time. That's then these individuals act as our seeds within the company, and we're seeing some really good results.
Amazing. And interesting, Roopesh, stepping a little bit in terms of the wider lens, right? Because there will be many people listening to this webinar and our audience today that are not in executive search or recruitment in that sense, but are that business partner to the business, right? What would your advice be to move from that kind of like reactive, hey, here's a rec, versus where does the CMO want to build his or her team, right? Like, how, like, what are the things that you would advise our audience to do to get to that kind of like business partner level?
That's the holy grail in recruiting, isn't it? I mean, we talk about talent advisor. What does it mean?
Yeah.
I've seen companies that saying, right, we've done this course now. You're all talent advisors. Change your signature. They're doing the same job they did on Friday, but on Monday their title is different. I mean, just what does it mean? I think, look, controversially, the role of the recruiter will become obsolete unless we raise our game. And I genuinely believe that. I interview people constantly, and I have no idea how they're in their jobs. They work at great companies that are getting great salaries, got great jobs, and they're nowhere near the caliber of people that I need. And and it happens so often. What that says to me is there's still many organizations that are allowing their teams to just transact. Here's the search. Let's post and praise. Keep our fingers crossed. Post the job. Let's hope the world's best talent go to our careers page. They're filtering through to uncover not the best candidates. They're filtering through the best of those that apply.
Yeah.
And that's very different to the best. And so if you're going to operate that way, your role could become obsolete with some of the newer technologies out there. And there's some research done recently where they've said if you happen to be a candidate that applies for a job and the recruiter at the other end of that transaction does not recognize the 3 last companies that you worked for, the chances of you getting an interview are 0. Like, how can that still be happening? But it happens every day. And there's incredible AI technology out there that learns over time that's able to say the last 5 people in this role, the last 10 people in this role were hired with these. Of those 10, these 6 were the most incredibly successful. What backgrounds did they have? What hobbies did they have? Where did they work? What regions were they in? And the machine tells you, here's the individuals to go after. If you're just going to think you can survive by transacting, our industry is going to look very, very different in not very long.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, what are you going to do to raise the game? What are you going to do to really be different? And the talent intelligence term is overly used, right? But what I say to my team is like, offer something that's not being asked. Uncover, like, really take time to understand their business. I put all of my team through whiteboard training. I've got a whiteboard here. Like, we're used to going into, when we were going into the office, in the office of an executive, and we're the ones sat down because they're stood up whiteboarding. This is where I want to take my business.
Mm-hmm.
I have my team now. They're the ones that are standing up. They're saying, here, and whiteboarding is a skill.
Yeah.
Here's the competitive landscape. Here's the 8 people that I feel that can do this job. Here's what they're all doing today. Here's the people that are in our network. Here's the kind of things that we would need to put into place to entice them. This is why they left their previous companies. Like, this is information that hasn't been asked. Go in. I mean, I say to my team, when you come out of a meeting, if I'm going to ask that leader their impression of how that meeting went, what do you want them to be saying? Like, do you want them to be saying, looked really smart, came prepared, did a whiteboard, shared intelligence that I didn't ask for, I learned something from him, he knew his candidates inside out, or she knew her candidates inside out. I've sort of changed the way I'm thinking about my strategy based on that meeting. Or do you want them to say, they shared with me 8 people that have applied for the job, some of them look good, we're going to see how it goes. Yeah. I mean, it's very different, but you have to want to do it. And it does take work. It does take reading. It does take going on courses. It does take getting mentors. I learned so much from people that are at every stage of their career. But if I want to learn about enterprise software, I'm going to go out of my way to speak to people in that space so I can really get to the heart of what's happening in that business. And if you really want to be that top 5%, then it's not going to land on your lap. You need to go out and really work for it.
Yeah. Such a good example. I really very, very valuable there. Question in the chat, Roopesh. Interesting, right? It's with many new kind of like generations, currently Gen Z, millennials, the boomers. People are not at companies for a lifetime. Actually, it's a year is almost long, especially at tech companies. Yeah. To that extent. Also, to your point where you said, even if the people that didn't want to leave Uber, they're leaving Uber. So, how do you do that? Deal with that from both a generation approach? Like, do you have any difference there with maybe more younger leaders to that extent? And maybe also for our younger, more restless generation, what would your advice be to them?
Good question. I think, look, what's happened to us all over the last 2 years, no one could have predicted. And, we talk about great resignation, that pent up demand and people thinking differently. I've asked myself a few times, like, what's it all for?
Yeah.
Like I work a lot of hours. I genuinely enjoy my job, but I work a lot of hours like many of you. And if I'm saying, well, it's all for my family and my kids, well, by me working those hours, I'm actually not spending time with them. And by the time I think, okay, I have enough in the bank to be able to spend time with them, they're not going to want to spend time with me, right? So
yeah.
So I think there is a sort of moment of realization that people are going through right now, and at every level. I've not necessarily at Uber, but what I've experienced in the last year, just with understanding what's going on in the market, I've never seen senior leaders that have got huge teams applying for jobs that are more junior. Very rarely you do see that trend in the market. We're seeing that every day where people are asking themselves, yes, I've got lots of money. Yes, my salaries are great. Yes, I've got 1,000 people in my team, but I'm traveling the world. I'm not opening that coffee shop I always wanted, or I'm not playing enough golf, or, I live by the sea, but I've never been to the beach for the last 3 months. Like, what's it all for? And so I think, and what I'm getting at is the decision drivers have really changed. And where it was all about, well, more often than not, it was about the money, the job title, what it said on my business card, the number of people in my team, how much money I get paid, the benefits. Where it was like, in any research that you saw, the key decision, these were the key decision drivers. We never used to see innovation and purpose and balance and return to office policy, or like, these weren't the top criteria.
Yeah.
Now we know that's really apparent. I mean, we've done lots of research here at Uber. Like, we get, I can't share how much, but multiple percents more applications for the same job if we say it's remote. Like, most companies would have that. Like, knowing that we would have access to a greater pool of candidates, arguably greater pool means that you may get access to higher qualities of candidates. That why we have to rethink about how we recruit and who we want to recruit. So all I would say is understand those decision drivers. If you don't go externally for that research, you can do it yourself. Invest in your employer brand, because if you know what is attractive to the talent segments that you're going after, what are your people posting on social media? What does your marketing collateral look like? Is it consistent? And does it resonate with the people that you want to speak to? And quite often there's a mismatch between, our most difficult hires are engineers in the Bay Area, but the employer brand is one for everyone. And I think we need to be really laser focused on, who are we trying to talk to? Does the message resonate? And is it consistent across our organization? Just maybe a few things to look at that.
Yeah. Good insights, and fascinating what happened, especially over the last couple of years.
It's incredible.
Roopesh, so you lead a global team, right? Talent can be found anywhere, and these days we're more connected than ever. So with your type of rules, like, where do you start if talent can come from anywhere in that sense? Like, and how do you define this scope and leverage the international global executive market?
Well, I think I referenced earlier that if we're going to provide the level of service to the company that I know we can, it's really difficult to have your exec recruiting team centralized in one location. It's going to be really difficult to gain the credibility to say, I live and work in the UK, but I'm an expert in the Singapore market. So I think you really need to understand where the priorities of the business are, and then ask yourself, how can I find someone that doesn't only have the discipline and the art of recruiting and understand search and the detail that needs to go into search work, but also can combine that with a knowledge of the space. So to answer your question, like, how do we tap into the global market? We need to have a global team. And not many organizations may have the luxury of having lots and lots of people. We certainly don't have as many people as we would like, but it's a sizable team. Look at your key hubs. Where's the highest demand? Put a case forward to your organizations to say, the opportunity cost of not having someone in this location is this. Like, the opportunity cost is we can identify anyone through the online tools that we all have access to, but we won't have relationships with them. We won't know them by reputation. And it's a bit of a stab in the dark as to whether they're going to be successful here. If you have people on the ground that understand that landscape, we can compete with anyone externally. I think that's number one. And I think number two is leverage your network. Like, we have 22,000 people globally. Very rarely, or certainly not as much as we would like, when we have a search, are we saying, okay, we're looking at people from I won't say a company, from X company. Why don't we? The first thing many people do is let's go to the online tours and figure out how we head up these people, as opposed to here's a list of all of our 22,000 employees. How many people did we hire from this company? That's our pool, right? And so that's how we get international. We start calling upon everyone individually who's come at these companies. We can build out org charts within days because we get that first-hand intelligence of what's happening at these business, who the movers and shakers are, and who are the people that really to develop a bond with. And then lastly, it's what we need to build here is a strong alumni program. As I shared with you earlier, there are people that leave, and everyone, again, life moments, pent-up demand, rethinking what it's all for, huge salaries. Like, people leave for many, many reasons. They don't necessarily need to be disheartened by your manager or the company. These are incredible people that are part of our extended Uber network. They've been at our organization. They've been trusted to hold leadership positions. Many of them would have been instrumental here and developed their careers and done very well for themselves and for us. Like, they're very open to be able to continue to help us. And whether it's help us with the companies that they're at, help us with insights into their networks, but also what we're seeing across our tech space especially is what we're calling boomerangs. Like, many people that left thinking the grass is greener just to get X percentage more on the salary. Well, guess what, again, life doesn't always work that way. It's not always about an extra few quid every month. And we're seeing a lot of people that have woke up one Monday morning and thought, I really missed my team. I really missed that environment. I really miss the purpose that we had at Uber, and many people are returning. So, there's a whole host of ways that you can stay in touch with the communities without necessarily having huge teams.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Roopesh, we're almost rounding the hour. Like, time flies. Kind of like one more question in the chat. How many years do you think it takes to have enough networking and candidates to be able to bring enough value to any company from an executive search perspective?
You'll never be there. You're always learning. It's like golf. Like, why did Tiger Woods have a coach? I mean, surely he'd made it. You can never master the art. And I certainly haven't. None of my team have. We're all learning. And like, I think, I sometimes interview people like that. There's a difference between confidence and arrogance. There is so many more people in the world than you'll ever know. There's companies that are evolving constantly. And I also believe, and this is another hour's worth of topic. I ask my leaders all of the time, like, do you have to have done the job to get the job? Like, traditionally, how search works is, let's use that CMO example. If we have a position for a chief marketing officer, what are we going to do? We're going to go out to market, make a list of all of the companies we admire, and find out either who's the CMO today or who was the CMO, right?
Yeah.
But there's lots of research to suggest your previous experiences aren't a predictor of future success. And if that is the case, then surely we need to think beyond that. We need to look at what your drivers and personality traits are, and your followership and your leadership trust scores, and what made you successful rather than what domain you're in. And if we start thinking about that, you don't necessarily have to have done the job to get the job. And this is where we really need to build a program internally. If you're part of the organization and you're in marketing and you're looking for your next leap, do you have to wait for your boss to leave? Or do we see qualities in you that we can consider you to move into strategy or planning or roles that you need leaders to exhibit those behaviors and personality traits, but not necessarily the domain. So, we're going to go into a whole new realm in exec recruiting over the next few years. It's going to be interesting.
Fascinating. Roopesh, last question. What advice would you give our audience if they want to move into executive search, or if they're maybe interested to get in touch about the exciting opportunities that are open at Uber?
It's almost like a role of an investigative journalist, the work that we do. after I have a conversation with any leader, I go back to my desk and I normally block out half an hour and I write the story, like not the job description, like why are we hiring? What's the opportunity cost of not hiring? Who do we have in the team? Like you have to build out a story. And what I would say is, like, if you want to get into this industry, you have to really have your finger on the pulse, and that's the value that you're going to add. You're being asked to go after people that don't want to speak to you. You're being asked to go after companies that are potentially paying more than you. And so you need to have so much more than salary and job description, and you need to really embed yourself in a business, and that can only happen with you building relationships. I think number two, do it with heart and do it the right way. It's a cutthroat environment. Sometimes we get a bad reputation. You need to do things right. And lastly, which is one of our values at Uber, is great minds don't think alike. And go in with that kind of mindset to say, we can think differently. We can introduce you to incredible people that aren't an obvious fit, because, you know, if we believe that an inclusive environment has inclusive ideas and potentially will enrich, you know, what you're trying to do as an organization, you know, understanding that and being that person that's the role model in ensuring, you know, they're getting that point across is sort of what's important to me.
Amazing. Roopesh, there were even more questions. We weren't able to cover all of them. What's the best way for people to connect with you if they have any questions? Is it LinkedIn?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect.
LinkedIn's good.
Roopesh, thank you so much. Really appreciate it of your time, especially giving your recent role that you now co-lead the global TA function at Uber. For our audience, next week, that will be our last session in our webinar series. I will actually be presenting on how to build a sourcing function. So please join us for our last webinar series next week. Thank you all for dialing in for the interaction in the chat. And Roopesh, once again, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.